Hey guys, welcome to another Team of the Tournament video, whatever the hell I'm going to call it, I'm not too sure. I'm here with Banks, and we're going to be talking about the Red Bull Homeground Tournament. Not only because you casted it, but you have recently put together a roster with Alliance, right? So I'm genuinely curious, certainly to begin with. I think a lot of people, if they were put in this situation to do something like we're doing now, they'll open up VLR or the Spike, see who's got the top ACS and go, all right, yeah, Scream is my pick for Jet, which honestly is a fair assumption, but, you know, like Magoo or somebody like that for Footballist because of their stats. So for you, certainly when it came to Alliance as well, what do you look for? Because I'm still trying to find this out myself as like a color caster. Like the eye test is such a big thing. I know Foreign's spoken about it a lot recently. So how do you look at stats? What do you look for in an eye test? How do you decide who is a good player versus who is a great player?
So like for me personally, and I think this just comes from like years of watching different FPS and stuff, and also being a pro. Okay, I retired in 2007, so it's yonks ago. But like I have the understanding of what fundamentals I look for. So like a default crosshair placement, right? Their tracing ability, their reaction time to things, but also their thought process. You look at the game sense. You can see some people who will just go in for a duel in a 1v1 or a 1v2. And sometimes they luck out and they get some crazy play. But then you see a bit more intelligence behind it, right? So there's a bit more to it than just looking at scores. Like for now, for when we're doing this, I am not looking at any VLR. I've got nothing open. I've just got your face in front of me in Discord here, and I'm just going to do it off of what I remember of how I like seeing people and what I think actually looked really good.
I think as well with stuff like this, I mean, you're from a Counter-Strike background, and I spoke about this with Van Silly last time. I think if we did like a best players of Europe in 2020, I think like top 10, how many players would just be the G2 roster, right? Like, but you compare that to Counter-Strike, a lot of the top 10 are all individual carry players from different teams because it's so competitive. Whereas I think
memory, there's only two, by the way. There's only two in the top 10 of Counter-Strike who are on the same team off my memory for this year. I think it's Electronic and Simple. Simple number 2, Electronic 5. Right. Maybe there's two Astralis players in there, but that's like Device third and then the other ninth. But everyone else is completely different. And the way they do it, like they don't give you the formula, but they look at like event winnings, but also the impact they have if they're hitting like crazy high score lines. So obviously ACS has to be very factored in because you're not going to pick someone who's just bombing out the whole time. But there could be a more supportive tactical element that you go, okay, he's actually big brain. I want him.
Yeah, right. And I think that's the main thing with this because I don't imagine, like, for example, on my list that I've just jotted down, I've got one G2 player.
Okay.
Which I think
I'm interested because I would only have one G2 player as well.
Yeah, right. I think people might look at this and go, oh, it should be 4 G2 players. Like, who's a better Sentinel player than Piff, for example? And I do think the Piff had a good tournament. But at the end of the day, I think it's more about highlighting players that you probably don't get any credit because they didn't go too far in the tournament. People don't know the narratives for them beforehand. And just, you know, for example, if we're to start on a roll, I think the Sentinel Cypher Killjoy is a really good one. I'm curious about what your pick is because this is just an example of what I've been talking about. I actually put on FQ from Frenzy Go Kill or Team Vitality because whilst they didn't go far in the tournament, they got 2-0'd by G2 straight away in the main event. They did win the qualifiers, and he is possibly one of the better Sentinel players within Europe that people just don't know about because people didn't really give too much credit to Exile way back when. Because when we saw them, you know, you went over them literally in the Blast sort of first strike qualifying games, right? Exile played up against Summon.
Yep.
And nobody really knew about Exile at that point. They were just a group of young fraggers. But now, literally at this point, 4 out with us 5 players on that team have been signed to various orgs, right? So I think FQ, is Piff better than him? 10 games, for example, probably, like consistently up there. But I think the FQ had some really good stats in the open qualifiers. I think that he did okay in their game against G2, all things considered. And he is a player that not many people would actually sort of bring up as he is a really good player. So that's kind of what I wanted to do with these kinds of videos. But I'm curious at what you have, because I don't think really any Sentinel player stood out a huge amount in this tournament. Like Cryptix had a really good series and stuff, but he wasn't the reason why Team Liquid went as far as they did, right?
So you said like about Cryptix, he's actually going to be my pick. So I want Cryptix because I like the fact that he was just rocking the Killjoy, right? I'm believing that we start to go further with the Killjoy side of things, that the ultimate's going to pay off so big, and not just in retakes, but like aggressive pushes as well. And I feel like sometimes on Cypher, although the ultimate is great and the trapwise can give so much information and how it can be used on the cages, I feel like we'll move into a meta eventually where Killjoy will be more favored than the Cypher across all maps. For me with Cryptics, the thing I like most about him is I know this kid can pop off every now and again. Now, he's obviously always going to be overshadowed when you've got a player like Scream on the roster. When I look at Cryptics, he doesn't overpeak. He doesn't get too aggressive. He doesn't take fights he shouldn't fight, right? He's the player who will stand his ground, be able to hold his position. Okay, he doesn't maybe hit huge numbers, right? Like you mentioned, if you look at Piff, probably individually Piff is better. But what I'll get from Cryptics is a player who can lock it down, who won't die early, and will give me what I fundamentally need on my Sentinel.
For sure. I think the only like negative side of a Killjoy a lot of the time is with Cyphers, especially on the attack, they're so much better at lurking on their own.
Definitely.
You know, if you're looking at Split, the A site, typically where you put the Cypher camera. And I think Team Liquid's biggest concern for me was on their attack. All 5 of the players stood pretty much together, moved to the site together, plant on the spike together. They don't seem to really spread, and I think playing a Killjoy is what, and it makes it super difficult. But I do think you're right. I think Killjoy is going to be the future of this Sentinel role. As an addition, FQ picked up Rainer at some point and played him as a Sentinel on Icebox, right? So we saw a lot of that overall. But generally, I think that both these players, the whole reason for doing stuff like this is they won't get enough credit, I don't think. Nobody would ever mention Cryptics as being a really star performer.
And this is the thing, right? You said about like how I built the Alliance roster, and not to use the Alliance roster out there, but like I looked at Summon FC, I wanted to pick them up, but they were already going to Fnatic, and we were having these conversations. It was like, okay, cool. I'm not going to try and match what Fnatic are doing. And the only other team I looked at, right, was the old No Penky lineup, but then they broke up. CNED went elsewhere. So for me, I was like, there's actually no 5 players where I can go, yeah, I want all of them. And I thought it was just better to try and build it like we're kind of doing here, right? Look at what options there could be to make improvements, because we often see teams change 1 player, but you never see them really go and change 2 players when needed, maybe, or make a drastic decision, which I think is something sometimes when teams are really hitting rock bottom or not being able to reinvent themselves, you need to almost shed a lot of the fat and kind of start a rebuilding process.
Is there any particular role that you want to move on to next? We haven't even spoken about how you would define a team, right? Like, because I had it before when I did the NA one, where it's like you have 2 duelists pretty much all of the time, a Jet and like a Rainer or a Raze. Very different here. There were some teams that ran no duelist, like Ninjas in Pajamas, right? So how would you structure this team if you're picking up these individual players and putting them together?
So how I'm looking at it for this is like possible multiple agents, like my Sentinel role, definitely that's the easy one. You're going to have that in there. Then I look at like a player who is the star player. So your Scream, for example. And then I look at the next one as like your Flasher, your Smoke, and your IGL. And they can fill multiple agent roles within that, depending on what setup you want to run. But I might close together like the Flashers, right? And I might close together the Brimstone and the Omens as the Smokers and do it that way. For an IGL, they can almost be a flex. Sometimes you got like an Angel IGL who's a high frag in IGL that you could even argue you might want to put them on the dual list as an example. So I think it can be a lot looser, and it's a lot harder to define roles in Valorant. Like we see some teams, one map they'll play a duelist and be popping heads. The next minute they're on a smoker again,
You got to be more flexible than putting people like in North America. It definitely feels like, all right, this is the Omen player. It also tends to be the IGL. This is the Sova player. Now we're starting to see a bit of Sky and stuff, right? Like, so I think that now we're starting to break out of this archetypal roles. And with any luck, we see a bit more fluidity. I think in Europe, we're already seeing that, which is super exciting. And teams played to their strength. And I think when it comes to other players that I want to highlight, I think another sort of main role, like you mentioned, is that controller, the Omen, the Brimstone. Is there any particular player that played on that smoking role that stood out to you that you wanted to highlight as your like team of the tournament, your best Omen or Brimstone from the Red Bull home ground?
So not just my choice, but you're saying best Brimstone or Omen?
I think so, yeah. But I mean, if it's like an IGL, like they don't have to be heavy on stats, but if you feel like, for example, I'll start with mine. I put Mystic down from Summon FC because, again, I think that he's a player that doesn't get an awful lot of credit. I think Summon, now Fnatic, actually, literally a couple of hours ago, Fnatic.
Oh, yes.
It's good to see that. It feels really like vindicated to see them actually be signed. Like
About time.
Party Parrots for Breaking walked so Summon FC could run and actually get signed as a full 5-stack, which is great. It's pure vindication for the European scene. But I feel like overall, none of the players get a typical, they are the best, TSAC isn't the best Sentinel role.
Definitely not. No.
Boaster's not the best Breach in Europe. Is he the best IGL? Maybe, but you get the point where it always feels like those names from Fnatic don't actually get recommended as being a top talent. I think Doma is now certainly up there as the top 3 best raises. I think he's overtaken players like Yassine, who had a really poor performance, but again, we only saw 2 maps from him. But I think Mystic is consistently up there with not only the Omen, but a bit of Brimstone and the Viper too. And I think that he should be mentioned more when it comes to some of the best controller players within Europe.
Yeah, so for me, I was looking at it as like between Kriya and Mystic. Now, I know Nip didn't do fantastically well, but this is the best looking Nip we've seen come out there. And I'm going to go with like the Mystic as my pick, but Kriya deserves a special mention because I felt like at the beginning of Valorant, he was such an innovative, smart Omen. Then he certainly got figured out, you know, like he was always the one teleporting into his own smokes, throwing 2 smokes down. You have to guess which one he's going to go through and then being slapped around a bit. But then he's kind of reinvented himself, whether that's to do with existence helping him out or how it all goes down. But I really would say that Mystic gets the edge in the individual ability, right? So Kriya was able to have some good rounds, some great clutch rounds, but Mystic is still so young. And this is what people got to remember about Summon is like, so many of those players are not experienced. Like Chak, I was there in 2009 where he was winning Counter-Strike Source tournaments, and then he disappeared, didn't really do too much in CSGO. And then he comes back into this, plays with some more UK guys, and he's finding success himself. And then there's Boaster, who was playing high level, at least in the UK, not internationally. And they all, the rest of them, just didn't have like huge amounts of like high level experience. And they come together to form this epic Summon that's now Fnatic, you know, and they've done really well. So I think on this one, we can definitely agree that it'd be Mystic, but Kriya was like a close one. We just have to see his development and how it goes further along with Nip.
Yeah, I really like what Nip have done because I think before Kriya felt like he was reined in a little bit with Safe in that roster too, that they were kind of like, no, you can't be super aggressive. This tournament, he was literally doing the whole using the From the Shadows ultimate to teleport into the enemy spawn every single time. And it really just screwed over that team because they knew that it was coming, but they were so scared of fighting.
You got to deal with it.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't, like you mentioned, he was probably the weakest link out of this Nip team from this tournament, at least, when you look at the kills, the impact that he had individually. But you can tell that he just needs to get into that position where he's warming up. And I think to sort of talk about another role and another Nip player that's done this and did it at a much faster rate, I'm going to sort of go for like the entry player, I guess. Okay. And you've got to give it to Rhyme. Like, I had no expectations of this guy. When I heard that he was moving on to the entry role for this team, and it wasn't going to be Jaddy playing the Jet, the Raze, or whatever, I suppose, in that role, it's just question marks to me. I was like, why? That doesn't make any sense, because whilst Rhyme was always decent, he was always good, he was never great. He never had a really good series for Ninjas in Pajamas. I know Strong's always mentioned him as like a James Milner kind of player. He's always been like really okay, but he's never had like an absolute life performance. It's just always consistency with him. And I think Ryan moving on to that role showed that sense of consistency. But now that he's not the IGL for that team anymore, you could see the weight just off his shoulders. It was so key for him and such a good performance. And Nip didn't look good. They looked completely mishandled when it came to how they were ran. And this tournament is such a breath of fresh air, and I'm so happy for them and Emil that have got stuff going. But Rhyme, I think he deserves that kind of like Raze, Phoenix, whatever else role.
So for me, right, when I'm looking at that, what you're talking about with the Nip lineup, I feel like Rhyme got put on IGL when he should have never been IGL in the first place. Fair play to him, he took it, right? But management making stupid decisions by the looks of it with the whole Nip roster. Then they get Existence, legendary in-game leader, big brain plays, also played Valorant since the beginning and actually loves the game, similar to Angel like that. I see JD and Rhyme together as the superstars of this future Nip roster because Rhyme is unleashed again, right? He doesn't have to think about anything else, doesn't have to worry. He can be that entry fragger, but he has the confidence that there's good players behind him now to pop off as well, you know? Like, he's got success that's going to come his way. For me, though, if you're looking at that like the entry fragging or the so I'm going to call this role the second star, right, as my third space on this. And who I was going to go for is I'm going to take Soulcast. So with the raise in there, with the ability he had to mix things up, the fact he was able to be the second star to Scream that takes so much space on a map, right? And he consistently brought that back. Now I know all the drama he went through and all this stuff with like what happened at First Strike main event. End of the day, he was nearly benched. They didn't bench him, and he came back and delivered the performance of a lifetime. Like, it's the best Soulcast we've seen. So, like, for me right now, I would say Soulcast alongside a really good star going in. Like, Soulcast is the secondary you want in. You want your jet player, whether it's a Scream or whoever else is a Mixwell trying to do it. And then you have Soulcast as the second line. That's like huge firepower coming in there. And I feel like all that's going to happen with Soulcast is going to get better at this stage. Because when I watched him in terms of like playing in clutch rounds and actually being able to not just deal with not having as much space, but be able to handle the fallback if someone did go down, he was able to cover his own. And that was impressive for me. So now I've got Mystic. Who did I say first? Oh, Cryptics and Soulcast. So I've got 3 Brits in there.
Yeah, that's what it's building up to. I actually put Soulcast in a different role, but we can get onto that.
Okay.
I've effectively got a 6th man role, by the way. So it's almost kind of like you just a player that might have been switching between various roles, right? Like, you know, Jelly would be a good example of that, where he just played all sorts of different stuff. But I think, would you consider Sova to be a main integral role of the team? I guess that main
Definitely,
sort of initiator.
yeah. Other than on split, it's like needed.
Who would be your player for that role then? Because I feel like this is probably that one G2 player that you were mentioning before, right?
It is. It's Artist. I'm going in with Artist for it because at the end of the day, right? Yeah, I know. Technically not a Brit, but he is from Liverpool, you know. But yeah, for me with Artist, it's like people go, "Oh, he didn't have a great tournament or didn't have put up great numbers," but you cannot deny the guy's confidence and ability in those rounds. Like if it wasn't for Scream pulling off that insane ace, like they had that round, G2 had that round, they probably would have money screwed completely Liquid, and we may have seen a complete different storyline of how that ended out. But overall, what I like from Artist is that he brings this knowledge of the game from the very beginning. His skill ceiling's very high, and even on his bad days, the impact he has is still massive. You know, when we saw them move over to Split, I was worried because they just lost a NIP 13-5 on it, right? And they go up against Liquid, and guess what? Artist just comes back in, and was it Split or was it Ascent? Might have been Split. No, yeah, it was Split because he was playing on his raise, and he comes back in with a raise, and he just opens up space, and he's very high risk, high reward. So he pops out the ultimate, right? Showstopper comes in, and he's just marching forward without any info. But he'll take that shot, and then if he goes down, there's players behind him to back it up or to refrag him, for example. So yeah, I got to give my Artist boy some love. And now I have got 4 Brits. So do I diversify? I'll just keep everyone British on this team.
You just stick with it, I suppose. Put together like a team for XL or something at this point.
There
I mean, I had Artist the same. And what I've done so far, at least writing it down, is I've made, because what I realized from the previous episode with Van Silly is we had it like we both said a Proto, we both said Zoms, we both said Thief. Like I put down Kriya for you as like the controller thing because we had the same answers, but most people can't. Like we'll have like a full team where we both decide on who should be in it. I guess it's like a Mystic versus Kriya. I mean, obviously it's going to be Mystic in that case, but like
because I was more for Mystic, but I was just singing the praises of Kriya, right? So we kind of aligned on a few things.
Yeah, it's just like a nomination, really, like a certain highlight. And I had Artist down as well, but the issue is about this silver role is I don't think anybody else really had like a super standout performance. I think most people did fine. They did okay. You know, Machina, he used to play Sova way back when, played Jet for Purple Cobras, and First Strike came back to the Sova, looked decent. I even think, as people been memeing on Monkey Business, I think Tavik had an okay series playing the Sova. I thought he wasn't the problem, but I'm not going to put him down as my player of the tournament because it's freaking monkey business at this point. Like, come on. But like, you've got JD in there that had a couple of rounds. I think Mo, I would probably say Mo actually for Fnatic because again, I think it's a similar thing with VQ and Mystic to an extent where they don't get recognized as being top tier talent. I think with Sovas as well, Artist is always going to be, I think he is the best Sova in Europe, might be the best Sova in the world with not how much he gets frags or how much damage he does but utility usage is bar none. You know, we saw the Jonas lineups coming out, killing the Killjoy lockdowns. Yeah. That's just stuff that you will get from him because he knows his role and he is world-class at any role that he wants to play. But I do think that now Summon have become Fnatic, they need a little bit more credit of going, these are some of the best players in Europe, maybe even the world at the roles that they play. And Mo's still pretty young, as far as I remember. Like, he's still a young UK lad sort of coming through. So I think he's a worthy nomination, like a second place, but I would definitely agree with you in the sense of an overall team best Sova of this tournament. It's Ardis, but it's almost always Ardis.
Yeah.
I feel like that leaves us this main MVP role, right?
Star player.
It's Scream, right? It's got to be.
It has to be. Thing is, right, I tweeted this. He is the best player individually in Valorant right now. He doesn't need an operator to be on the jet. His aim is insane. Do you see what he was doing? He was taking angles, like aggressive angles beginning of round. And if he doesn't hit the headshot with the first 2 bullets or maximum 4 bullets, he just dashes out of there. Like, to have that confidence and not just to take the fight and not have an operator to do it with. Okay, we saw him pick up the operator a few times. I'm not a fan of that. Please don't do that, Scream. This guy's headshot percentage before the grand final was like 42%. It was insane. Like, the guy is a monster. He is so good with the rifles, the Phantom, the Vandal. He can pop off with it as well. His pistol plays. Like, Scream is the most complete and mechanically gifted player within Valorant right now. And I know the North Americans would just get tilted by this, but like, wait until they have to deal with Scream. His dot crosshair placement is next level.
I have to agree, and I don't even think you can mention anybody else within that role, right? It's not...
Maybe if Magu, like, we saw more from him, because he had a few great 100%. Moments on the jet in particular. But I think if you gave him the same length of a tournament, the same opposition, Magu would not be able to stand strong. Scream had 2 series where it's nearly 100 kills. 2 series with 100 kills. Like, that's insane.
Yeah, it's just, it doesn't really compare. Like, I think you're right about Magoo. I think he did have a life game on Split against Nib, to be fair, and then as the series went on, the energy started to dip a little bit. It's tough, though, really. Like, I'm looking at some of the other, like, Zeke, maybe on the Reyna in some cases was pretty good, but nobody was Scream level. And I think it's almost an insult to bring up anybody else considering how good Scream looked. So I think that's an easy one.
I thought we'd align on that. So there we go. With one non-Brit.
Yeah, he's pretty much a Brit with the team that he's got around him at this point. He's been watching EastEnders apparently as well. Like, I think it was Cryptics that got him into watching EastEnders. So Christ knows
that's a downhill spiral you're going to take him on into the depths of London.
He apparently after the game, because it was the like Yinsu Overdrive show, all of Team Liquid were in the chat after that final, apart from Scream, who, as Eccles put it, was testing out his new whip, and then everybody was joking that he was, driving around the Tesco Direct, in his new like Bugatti or whatever, which sounds like it would be Scream. So we have like one last role, and I've called it the 6th man, and I think I've put it down as Soulcast because I feel like it would be a huge disservice to him to not be mentioned at all in a role. Obviously, you had him in as that sort of entry player, but I think what impressed me the most was that Sky usage. Because the problem with Soulcast is that his raise was always good. Did it drop off a little bit over time? Yeah, but I think that's just because people like Yassine started to come in a bit more. Doma started to come in more with a raise. It was more the competition started to get a lot tougher, and Team Liquid, and especially Soulcast, didn't show up in the same way on that role. But it was the Sova, right? Soulcast's Sova didn't look as convincing in First Strike. I think that was his weakest area, and it was an obvious flaw, I think, for Team Liquid in the Heretics game, for example. I think that's like a clear descriptor of that going wrong. Not only did the Sova look much improved, certainly in their series against Guild, it was exceptional, but I like the fact that he went above and beyond by playing a bit more Sky. I think that it's a big gamble. Obviously, Sliggy there to sort of help and go, this is a good move going forward, but he made that agent his own. We're seeing this a bit more in like North America, teams like Envy with Crashies, Sick from Sentinels picking up the Sky a little bit more, but nobody's quite played it at the level of Soulcast. And it's actually really nice to be able to say that he is now like leading on an agent again, where he used to be on Raze back in Fish 123 days. He was the best Raze in Europe, but then Zipan comes along, Doma comes along, all of this other competition starts to come in, and you start to see almost Soulcast drop down a little bit in those sort of rankings. But the performance on the Raze, on the Sova, on the Sky made me think that he was one of the best and certainly the most improved player in this tournament.
But do you not think, right, if we're both picking Scream, to have Soulcaster, because Scream's always going to be the first one in, right, 9 times out of 10 in an entry fragger style role. To just having Soulcast in as the next player behind him is like almost a dream scenario. I know what you're saying. Maybe if he's not just on the Rays and he's throwing the Sky in there. And we also got to remember that Eccles in that interview said the first time the Sky was pulled out, it was more down to him not calling so well on how it should have been used. And then you saw they had that really comfortable game on, I think it was maybe Haven. And we saw it a lot better use from Soulcast. We saw a lot more the attacking executes with it be able to be used, like getting the blinded come out and they're like, oh, okay, we know it's hit. We know to go in then and take the attack.
Yeah, it's a tough one, really. I think it's more... It's not quite a 6-man in maybe like the Counter-Strike way where it almost feels like a stand-in. But I think it's more a player that doesn't necessarily fit an archetypal role in a team.
Okay.
You know, because he played, like, for example, we have the Sova in the entry. A lot of teams, that player will be 2 of the same, right? And you've got the Jet. Some teams don't play Jet. Some teams don't play the Jet operator at all or that main star role. So I guess it's more a player that you haven't mentioned so far that you feel deserves credit because we're not talking about breach players specifically. We're not talking about like Reyna players. So it's not 6-man as in these 5 players are better and he's just an extra, but more so he doesn't quite fit into, if you're putting together a team, they could be in multiple roles or none of the roles depending on how you quantify them.
Yeah, so for me, there's a few players I want to just give like honorable mentions to in this kind of thing. Existence, for the amount of setups he did for Nip, you know, on that breach, flashing them in, but also was able to frag out at times. JD is like a superstar for the future. I know he played the Sage and the Sova, but like I just loved it. 17-year-old, absolute incredible player, would take big plays and commanding rounds for sure. And I think we should also mention Zeke, because even though Zeke may not be happy with his own individual performance at time, he brought Arena back into the mix where he was able to find some success. And I know he was annoyed at, like he tweeted out about it, the kills he got, but the impact he was able to have with the Arena was still big enough for me to say, okay, you could make this viable. There's an opportunity here to be had. Because they're running it on Ascent, right? If memory serves me. Yeah, so the Ascent Reyna is still something that I'm very excited to see from G2 if they keep it going.
Yeah, and it's more meta than people give it credit for because so many people are negative. I think I was talking to a LoL esports writer about this because they didn't understand why you'd run a Jet and Arena because they, like, to quote them, they do the same role, which I think is kind of underselling it a little bit. Where
definitely, yeah, bit too much.
The Leah flashes are really good. The Leah flashes are really good in mid specifically, and that's why you know Strong told me this. Like that's why you see a lot of Arena on Icebox, for example, because you can yeet the Leah, force people to look away the angle that you're playing on. They're forced to kill it in a lot of cases, gives up their position, and you can trade for your Leah in a lot of cases, right? Yeah, the ultimates are not great, and a lot of the utility is selfish, but I think a key thing about the Reyna picks that I quite like is if you are a Reyna and you're not playing well, it's not the end of the world because it's only negative impacting you, the individual playing Reyna. If you're a Sova or a Sky player and you're not playing well, or a Breach player, you know, still flashes, but more about team play. If you don't play well, you will screw over the rest of your team because they're relying on you to set them up because you're meant to be initiating play. If you perform poorly on Reyna, nobody's expecting much from you because you're playing Reyna. You're in your own little game, your own mini game almost when you're playing that agent. Whereas if you're playing something more team and utility focused and you do badly, a poorly timed flash can get your teammate killed. A poorly timed ultimate can not be used in the right way when you're executing onto a site. And so I think that, yeah, Reyna's a really selfish agent, but in cases like this where Zeke is very new to the team, it's almost damage mitigation. You play your game. If you don't do well, that's fine. The other 4 of us can play together because we've been playing together for so long, and we can make those team plays work. You just do you, honestly, is how I describe it.
Yeah, no, I can get behind that. That's cool. So what do we do now? We've got to decide of how we're putting this together. Like, what's our lines to agree on?
So I think... I think
Scream's easy.
Yeah, Scream is easy. I think Ardis is easy.
Okay.
For the Omen and Brimstone role, I think that's Mystic. But the Sentinel role, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think VQ's a really good shout, but Cryptics did better in the tournament, you know. And
it's just more pedigree, right? More
like
of the veteran to it.
I'm excited for this Vitality team whenever they get announced, this Vitality team, but it's still
maybe tomorrow. You know, at this point they're just waiting.
Could be in 5 minutes, like it should be, because VCT is literally starting today and tomorrow, depending on when this video goes out. But yeah, it's more the entry role and the sixth man, right? I think Soulcast deserves to be in there for sure, but it depends which. Do you want to put him in as the entry or the sixth man? Because I'm more inclined to put him in as the entry player and have him sort of go in over Rhyme, and then have the sixth man be JD or Jaddy, whichever way you pronounce it. Because I think...
So you're saying put Soulcast in as the entry behind the Scream, right? Because if we both agree on Scream, he's always the one going forward, and have Soulcast as the nice backup in there. But I would say in terms of performance, Rhyme definitely performed better in the tournament. But would you give away some of Scream's element by allowing Rhyme to be the one that goes ahead first, you know?
That's true. I do think that Rhyme has a very interesting way of playing as an entry, though. What was really funny with watching him in that game against Fubalist on Split is it was like he had just watched a War Owl video and he was learning how to clear angles, because it was so precise. He was like, all right, check a little bit, peek this, all right. It was so slow with how he was clearing angles. But the cool thing about it was he got faster as the game went on, because he started to realize where Fubalist were holding. And he knew, all right, they never hold to here, so he just got faster at being able to clear angles, and then he started tearing it up. But I do think that Soulcast, that combination with Scream is the difference. But I think you have to put a Nip player in here. It could be one of 3 or 4 even, to be honest, with Cray being mentioned. But I think overall, Jaddy had the best debut, I personally think. I think Zeke did well, but Jaddy got people excited for this Nip roster, which honestly feels like it's resuscitating a dead person when it comes to the expectations of Nip, right? They're going into VCT with some... a good amount of firepower, and I think the Jaddy is, you know, we're going to be here in a year's time, 2022, looking at the best players of 2021. I think Jaddy is going to be a name that we'd mention a lot, and this is the first step in that. So I'm going to put him in as the sixth man, so to speak. So our
only
overall...
problem is, who's our IGL?
Do we need one? I guess you'd force
we're just running the fake G2, you know, of like no one's really IGL and someone just goes.
We'll just get artists to do it, I guess. It's such a weird team. But the 6 that we have is like Cryptics on the Sentinel, Mystic, Ardis, Scream, Soulcast, and Jaddy. That's a scary roster, and it's super cool. Like, if you told me that this would be like the top performers before this event, I probably would have laughed at you. But I think that we
would have gone maybe Ardis and Scream, and that's about it.
Yeah, right. I do think it's interesting that we have 3 Team Liquid players in here too. But I think that's justified. Like, I obviously G2 won the tournament, but I don't think Patty Tech or Piff had a standout performance, really. Mixwell, especially, I thought was pretty quiet in some cases. He had some great plays, but Scream was just better.
Yeah. This is Mixwell only able to step up in the grand final and put up some numbers, and obviously that was needed. They're the ones that took the win, but you just can't deny what Scream has to offer.
For sure. We're going to leave it there, I guess. Like, it would be great to have you in the future. I think Challenges especially is going to really sort of light up a lot of stuff at the moment. And obviously, best of luck with stuff like Alliance and stuff. It's going to be tough, to say the least, because EU suddenly got competitive. It went from this unsigned world where nobody seemed to take it seriously, and G2 was the only team in this region, to now being able to easily name 20 teams that could go on and do some work. So I'm very excited to see Looker get a second chance at least, and what you guys do there. And also, is it Creon is on your roster as well, right?
Yes, Craigon, yeah.
Is it Craigon? Is that how you pronounce it?
That's how you say it, Craigon, basically. That's what the 6 is.
Yeah. Like, I really liked him on Exile. I know that apparently he's quite toxic in ranked, but I mean, who isn't at this point?
He's learning some lessons from me. Just take it that way. He's definitely learning some lessons right now, but he knows what it's going to take to be a professional, and he wanted it bad enough, but he was aware that he may have not had the best attitude, and he can't get away with that, not around me.
No, I'm sure Faroff will tell him off as well, so I'm super excited to see that in action from like tomorrow onwards. But any final things you want to say about this tournament, casting, Alliance, whatever, going into VCT?
I think that, like, I'd love to see more tournaments like this, especially like warm-ups before big events, you know. The format, although people go, it was odd, getting best of 5s at that high level was just beautiful before VCT, especially as we start with so many best of 1s, which are always a bit awkward, you know, a bit awful, depending on how map pools work out and stuff. It is still, you got to beat whoever's in front of you and move on forward, but I think we'd all like best of 3s with it. I'm definitely down for doing this again, because this was fun, just trying to, like, got mix mash. It's like building a monster, isn't it? Building Frankenstein with loads of different players and finding some super team. So
yeah,
maybe one day we'll make a super team that becomes truth.
I think I think I wanted to do it, like, to be real quick on it, is just because so much of it was people being like, JD is cracked. Why? What does he do that Looker didn't do on Nip, for example? Like, there's not a lot of, people call it color casting, for example, but nobody talks about the color of these players, the personality of what does Rhyme as a race bring that Soulcast doesn't. And I think that this is a great way to kind of go, yeah, G2 are overall the best team, but there's other players and other individuals that need more of an illumination around them with how good that they are. And now that we actually have tournaments where, like, the 8 teams that get to Masters, I think it's fair to say that they're all going to be signed organizations at this point, unless one team absolutely comes in from nowhere, which would be great. But seeing Summon signed, seeing the players from No Penky signed, Exile being signed, all of those unsigned teams from First Strike now being a part of official rosters is super cool to see. And so that is possibly one of the reasons why I wanted to make this highlight individual players instead of just going G2 good, Nip better, like give it a bit more oomph and describe what's actually happening. But thanks for joining me, and thank you very much for watching this, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.